Yeah, the title here is As We Have Our Man, and I want to share a little bit about that. That was the title, that was kind of the caption that was put in the Toronto Star back in 1999. Shortly after I had applied to the RCMP and then went on to serve, I had opportunity to travel different parts of the country because the community was excited. The community, and when I say the community, I want to make sure that I acknowledge two words here. My community is a community of Canadians. I am a Canadian, and I include everybody in my community. And then there's the other community that I belong to as a member of a racialized community. That's the Sikh community. So when I talk about the Sikh community, they were ecstatic and were absolutely overjoyed that they have the representation within iconic institution. So when I was invited to Toronto to take part in an event there, one of the speakers there, as he was presenting, says, "We have our man." And you'll remember that one of the long-standing sayings of the RCMP is the Mountie always gets his or her man. So this was a play on that word, that the Sikh community had their man within the RCMP. And that's important, I believe, in sharing that, because it was such an emotional sort of, arrival at a time where this sort of acceptance into an iconic and a national organization that was felt through this community across the country. And it made folks believe and feel and experience this sense of belonging and this sense of, yes, this is also our home and we get to contribute. Now, the journey, as much as all of that was very exciting, I have to share with you that it was also full of adversity. And there was a number of events that occurred that I'll share with you here now. And also some of my own discovery of, who I was and my own self-resilience. Let me start by sharing with you where I come from. So I'm born and raised in Malaysia. I came to Canada when I was 16 years of age. And like many other immigrants, came to this country for a better life. My father passed away and my brother was already established here. And I'm grateful to this country for allowing my brother to sponsor our family and to immigrate to Canada, because it was with the loss of the breadwinner, my father, it became difficult. Financially, it was very difficult for us. And by arriving in Canada, we were able to pool our resources, work together, and make a go of it. And I have to share with you that in 1983, we have discrimination, racism today. It'll be with us, I think, for some time, but we've made great strides. We've come a long way. Now, let me just share with you, some of what the community was experiencing back in 1983. There was a tradition at the time of diluting identity, of fitting in. And one of those traditions, or one of those behaviors that had sort of ingrained itself in the community, was that when young Sikh men, or older Sikh men, but in particular young Sikh men would come into the country, they would be taken to the barbershop and have their hair cut and their turbans removed so they could fit in, so the family could protect them from any kind of violence, whether it's through words or action. And so the same question was put to me: when are you cutting your hair? When I arrived, by my own family, because they were concerned that if I did not, I would be subject to violence, words or action, or behave physical. At that point I had shared that, well, look, I had made a promise both to myself and to my father that I was going to maintain my identity, and this faith that I have, brought with me to Canada was something that I was completely entrenched in. It was who I was. It was my identity. It was without it, I really did not know who I was in my own self. And the promise to my father was an important one that who said to me and shared with me how important was that we maintain our identity. So when my family came to me, I shared at that time that I was not interested in cutting my hair or so-called fitting in. And I carried on. And I think that was probably the first test that the universe put ahead of me, because if at that moment, at that time, I had relented and given in to that pressure, I don't think we would have been engaging in this conversation here today. So I certainly believe that the universe had, other plans at the time. I started at Frankfurt Secondary, that's on 72nd and about 142-ish or something along those lines there. Many of you may know about of that secondary school. And, we talk about systemic racism. There were systemic policies at the time as well, and lots of things that we needed to reflect on as we welcomed immigrants into this country. So I want you to know my first day at Frankfurt Secondary, no one spoke to me when I got to the office. I presented my papers, they looked at my papers, and then they created my schedule for me. And my schedule included English as a second language. And I want you to know that my English hasn't improved. It's actually gotten worse over the years. But without any kind of assessment, based on my looks alone, my appearance, it was determined that I was in need of English as a second language. So I took the class. The teacher, very grateful to her, gave me some tests to determine where I was in my English language, which should have been done right from the get-go. Very quickly realized that as I passed every test and got up to grade 12 English language, remember in Malaysia, we spoke Malay as our primary language and English was a secondary language. And I spoke 3 other languages alongside those 2 languages. So very quickly, she realized that I didn't need ESL. As a matter of fact, I became a teacher's assistant in that class. She brought that issue forward and brought it forward to the teachers and also the administration at the Surrey School Board, that this was an unfair practice, that we should not be putting, immigrants into ESL classes if it's not needed. And that was a systemic issue that we needed to change in, and it was changed. After that process, there was an assessment that was done with new students to determine where they landed and as far as their language and math and other skill sets were concerned, so that they could be properly placed within that particular grade, within that school in a rightful grade. I'll skip over the conservative views in Free Canada, just to say that, in Malaysia, I come from schools that were very conservative. We wore uniforms, and so on and so forth. One of the experiences that I had on my first day, though, was that as I arrived into that school, I had somebody slap me on the back of my back, a light slap, and said, "Hey, I see that you're a new student." I was the only turban-wearing student in the school. I said, "Welcome to Frankfurt. Glad to have you here, and enjoy your time," sort of thing. So I was like, "Oh wow, wonderful! This is great. This is incredibly, warm." Towards the latter part of the day, another friend who I'd made during the time that I was there came up as I put my jacket on to leave. He said, "Hey, come here for a second." And I walked over and he peeled off a sticker on the back of my jacket, and it said, "Go home Hindu," on a CPR sticker. So, lesson learned that first sort of appearances may not be the right ones. And that unfortunately repeated itself a few times over my time here in Canada and in the past years. I also was given a new name by my teacher in the classroom. He asked each student to share their names. So I would say, well, and I said, my name is Baltej. And they said, well, say it once again. And I said, well, Baltej. I said, well, say it slowly. I said, well, Baltej. And he said, well, that's too difficult. So we're going to call you Bill from now on. I was like, all right. So I got a new name. You know what was the funniest part was that, and I didn't know any of this, but a couple of weeks later, folks were calling me William. And I had no idea where William came from because I didn't understand that Bill actually came from William. So I was talking about confusing a young man, in his school days as he was trying to figure things out. So that went on for a little bit. We came into this country and there weren't very many jobs that were offered. I applied everywhere. Applied to McDonald's. I applied to every kind of different place. And oftentimes they would tell me it was because of my beard and turban that they couldn't hire me. Other times it was just, we don't have any jobs anymore, even though there was a sign outside saying we're looking for people. So the only job that we could land at the time was labor, farming. And so I and my two younger sisters and my mother worked in the berry farms for 4 years, picked berries. We were probably the only students at Frankfurt Secondary that did not, were not excited when summer holidays came along. We were actually always praying that the summer holidays would be canceled so we didn't have to go to the farms to work. But unfortunately, summer holidays came, and the summer holidays was when we had to work long days. We'd start our day, and any of you who've done any kind of farm work and worked in the blueberry farms will remember your day starts very early, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. You're getting into the van, being driven out to the farms before the sun is up and the dew is still on the leaves, and then working throughout the day, picking blueberries, strawberries, raspberries. And, depending on the kind of berries you're picking, you're either standing, crawling, or, kneeling. And you'd be waiting for the horn to go off at the end of the day as the sun went down and you couldn't see the berries anymore, knowing that that was the end of the day. It was 7 days a week throughout the summer. So it was hard work. It was hard work, but it also gave great motivation that this is not going to be a career choice. we're gonna do something different here, not be a professional berry picker for the rest of our lives. So as I worked my way through high school and then went on to Kwalin University, at the time Kwalin College, to further my education, my intention really was to join or to become a lawyer, a legal criminal lawyer. And as I pursued my studies to get into law school, it was shared with me that it's very competitive, and it's important that you try to build a resume that is going to stand out compared to others. And one way to do that is to volunteer with the RCMP. So I did. What I did was I joined the RCMP Block Watch program as a volunteer in Surrey. And many of you may know or are part of the Block Watch program, and might be of interest to you, and for you to know that I was one of the first volunteers that installed Block Watch program in the city of Surrey. And that was very rewarding because we went and saw the community, met with a number of community members. We held conferences and different community meetings to let folks know about Block Watch and how they could, lend a hand in supporting a safer city. In that process, during that time, as I volunteered, and then later on, was hired on as a summer student to, again, advance the Block Watch program. I got a chance to meet the community and work with the community, and also go on ride-alongs with different police officers and RCMP officers. And what I got to know was that, the city of Surrey was growing by leaps and bounds, and the South Asian community, Indo-Canadian community was growing. But what was lacking was representation. And as we went from different calls to call, it wasn't uncommon that folks would come to me when I would get out of the police car, thinking that I was a police officer, to share their concerns or to share their complaint in the Punjabi language, and feeling comfortable in doing so. So it became apparent to me very quickly that representation was lacking within law enforcement of the community, and this was a challenge. And that was also shared with me by, at the time, the recruiting officers that worked within the RCMP and also other departments. And I was, through that time, I got to meet a number of police officers, and I still consider many of them my first role models. Dan Gibbons, who's now passed on. Greg Nixon, who went on to head the musical ride in Ottawa. And Greg Rogalski, who was my recruiting officer. These were my first mentors, and I looked up to them because I saw individuals and people that came to work every day, full of energy, motivated, inspired, looking forward to serving. And it was just, absolutely amazing to see these folks, continually on a daily basis, giving of themselves without care. Talk about a job where nobody went home at 4:00 and nobody came to work at 8:00. We were all there, by 7:30, and we'd be hanging around until about 5-6 o'clock, just because of the love of the work and the work that was being done. So they stood out to me as giants as far as, servants of the community, doing the work that they were doing as police officers and giving of themselves in a way that I had few opportunity to see. And so that inspired me. That was absolutely incredible for me to see. And then to be told that I would actually make a good police officer by these people that I looked up to, and said that, hey, you should join. You should come on board. You should come and serve as a police officer. That was really the beginning of me considering changing careers. Having heard that, having heard my mentors say to me that I was worthy, that I actually had the skills, I had the capabilities, the personality to make a good police officer, was encouraging. And it finally opened it up for me to begin to actually think about this as a possible career choice. And ultimately I did. Over a two-year period, I changed. I consciously made a decision to move away from going into law school to looking for work in law enforcement. I think it's also important for me to share here that I didn't just apply. My intention was not to become an RCMP officer. My intention was to become a police officer. And I think that's important to delineate, because I've at times heard, well, the only reason you joined was because you wanted to change the uniform. I didn't even think about the uniform at the time, to be honest with you. My only intention was to become a part of a law enforcement agency. So I had applied to Delta, Vancouver City, New Westminster Police Department, and even to the corrections services, because I thought that was also a place that was underrepresentation. It just happened that the RCMP was the first to call. I had gone through all of the other recruiting processes and had passed all of the exams with all of the other departments as well. But it was the RCMP that was first to call. And Bob Rogalski, who was the corporal at the time who was doing the recruiting, invited me to the office and said, hey, Baltej, I've got some great news for you. You passed all of your exams and your tests and all of your screening, and would like to offer you a job. We'd like to offer you a position in the RCMP and, send you off on to training. And I've got to tell you that, think about the moment when you arrived at your career choice and you were given that opportunity, and how much joy that brought you. So I was full of joy. I was just excited beyond words, which lasted all of about, about 2.5 seconds. Because right after that, what Bob said was, So all you got to do now is, shave your beard, cut your hair, remove your turban, and you're good to go. Because, we can't have any of that. And I said to Bob, I said, Corporal Rogalski, you know that I cannot do that. This is my faith. I'm not prepared to abandon my faith for this position. And I got to tell you, probably the longest 3 or 4 seconds ever in my life, because we were now at an impasse. This was my friend in front of me, and he considered me his friend, and he was asking me to abandon my faith, and I was telling him I don't want the job. And that was probably the most awkward time. I don't think he expected me to say no, and I didn't expect him to ask me to do that. And some of you may say, well, why didn't you, Baltej? You knew what the uniform was. Well, here's the reason why. I come from a country where seeing police officers and members of the armed forces wearing turbans was a commonplace. It wasn't something new, it wasn't something different, it was commonplace. And I'd also seen British police officers working with their faith intact. Not seeing somebody in the RCMP was merely, for me, well, I guess nobody stepped forward just yet. And, just like there are other industries where folks are coming into it, I'll do the same. And, there'll be accommodations, there'll be acceptance and all that good stuff. And away we go. I didn't for a moment see that this was going to be any type of an issue. Well, I guess I was wrong on that one. So what happened right after that was a debate. As Ellen shared earlier, I had a bit of a tiff with the country, as I often say. I think we're good now, but at the time, things were a bit challenging. Let me share a quick video with you. I look around the room, and I think many of you would remember this, but there's others like Emma, who was probably just a twinkle in her parents' eye at the time, and may not remember all of it. So I'll share this video just to kind of give us context on what some of the challenges and issues were at the time. And this is just a snippet in time.
Sikh Mounties have won the right to wear their turbans while in uniform. The federal government, which delayed its decision almost a year, gave the okay today, saying it was the right, legal, and moral thing to do. Ian Hon Singh now with that story.
Baltej Dhillon watched the government make its announcement on TV this morning. Dhillon has passed the RCMP's entrance requirements, but their ban on wearing turbans on duty prevented him from joining. The RCMP commissioner already said that ban should be lifted, and today, almost a year later, the government complied.
The modifications to the regulations to accommodate religious beliefs squares with Canadian human rights legislation and reflects this government's strong commitment to a multicultural society.
Hopefully now I'll be able to continue on with my goals, my career goals of becoming an RCMP officer, and I will not have this stumbling block that would prevent me from, one, practicing my religion, and on the second hand, serving my country, Canada, as a police officer in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
A leader in the Vancouver Sikh community applauded the decision.
We are very excited, very happy, and the whole Sikh community of Canada is very happy, and government of Canada has taken the right decision.
In Ottawa, the main opposition party supported the government's decision, but there was criticism that it took too long to make, that the delay led to an anti-turban campaign, which included petitions, pins, and a calendar, all of which, they say, whipped up anti-Sikh sentiments. Today, the man who created the calendar said he's not giving up his campaign.
No, we're going to keep on telling them. We've been getting support all across the country. This morning, the phone's just ringing off the wall. People telling me not to give up, keep on going.
At a convention of Saskatchewan municipalities, a motion was passed condemning the decision, touching off a debate on the issue.
It's a true Canadian heritage. Let's not change it.
The respect the RCMP have is not because of the uniform they wear. It is because of the kind of work and the kind of integrity they have.
That mix of reactions was common across the country.
I think it was absolutely the right decision, and it should have been made a year ago when the RCMP first suggested it.
Well, they're not in their own country, they're in our country. They can follow their own religion, but yet they should comply with our rules and our regulations.
Dhillon says he believes he'll face a lot of resistance, but he is prepared.
and I'm willing to take that on. I'm willing to go on that street, and I'm willing to look at these people in the eye and tell them that I'm no different from them.
The turban is not the only change coming up for the Mounties uniform. The famous brown gun harness will be replaced by a black one. The holster will be exchanged for a more efficient model, and women officers will be trading in their skirts for trousers. Ian Hanamansing, CBC News, Vancouver.
You know, we're making progress when we're turning in our skirts for trousers, right? So here's a kind of another look at that calendar, and I'm sorry that you've got this black thing in the middle, but basically what it says on the bottom is that does this make you Canadian or does this make you sick? And it's a play on word with the word sick, of course, and it's signed Sergeant Camel Dung. And Mr. Bittner decided he would go out and wear these shoes and get a sword that was, a bit of a sort of an Arabian Night sword, and he put on a turban and painted his face. I want you to know that, we used this type of caricature in World War I and World War II. This is what we did to dehumanize our enemy so that it would be easier to kill them. And so this is the kind of hatred that was being deployed at the time on this issue. We also had pins that I'll share with you here in a second. Now, during my journey, I came across specifically 3 different kind of people. There were those that were decided, and I have to share with you that the Jewish community in Vancouver at the time were incredibly supportive. I received a 3-page letter from them, from the president of the Jewish community center in Vancouver at the time, who wrote about all of the contributions that Sikhs had made within World War I and World War II, and also in France. That's a Sikh in France with a flag, Nazi Germany flag, and the sacrifices that have been made, and that and it ended with saying, the letter ended with saying that if you can lay your lives down for freedoms and choices that we enjoy today in the battlefields of Europe, then I think you can also serve this country in the streets of Vancouver and other places of this nation. The Sikh community also provided a lot of support. I also did a lot of interviews at the time because I felt that my fellow Canadians maybe didn't completely understand my faith and my traditions, and maybe that was part of the lack of understanding and awareness as to why this is so important for me, and why these traditions, this faith, this way of life is what identified me with my father, with my family, and my lineage and my legacy. So I took on to the heirs at the time. And I remember back then we didn't have Instagram, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Facebook, and whatever else we got going on these days. So it was all, through the news media, CBC and others. And so whether it's radio or TV. And that also, I mean, and print media. So I certainly got a lot of editorials that I didn't have time to share here today, but it was interesting. It was interesting to see some of the opinions that came in and some of the positions that people held. And I want you to know some of that still exists today. Unfortunately, it still exists today. And so there were those that were ill-informed. I often say, you know what, ignorance is okay. I don't know everything. I have ignorance on some things, absolutely, 100%. But staying ignorant is not okay. That's a choice. If you say, I don't know, then that is the very moment. If we say, I don't know, that is the very moment that there should be this sort of, incredible urge to go and look for the answer, to try to figure it out, to try to understand, to do some research. And really, these days, we have little excuse because we got these little things that are, more powerful than the computers that we had back then. So you literally have to type in a word and all of the answers are in front of you. So today, when someone says, well, I don't know who you are, I don't know what a Sikh is, or I don't know who the 215 were, that's a choice. That's a choice that a person's made to remain ignorant. And that, I don't know how you help that. I don't know how you help someone open up their minds if they choose to keep it closed, because that's a choice. It's a decision that they've made. But those that were interested, I had wonderful conversations. I have many friends that I've still stayed in touch with, and many of them are from Cornell, where I first started, who said, "Hey, I don't know." And back then we didn't have, the entire encyclopedia on a phone. So it was important to sit and have a coffee and have a conversation and share and interact and understand those traditions. And these type of conferences helped, where we were able to share, and folks were interested in learning, like many of you are here today. And you will share the story forward as well, and you will educate others. And that's how we learn. And isn't that what Canada's about? And so when folks asked me that question, I was happy. I was encouraged. I said, "Oh, thank you for, taking an interest." And I want you to know, I went to church. I was invited to church. I've been to church. I've been to the masjid. I've been to, the Jewish temple. And I've been to a Buddhist temple. My faith does not prevent me from taking part in, other celebrations. As a matter of fact, it encourages me to take part in other celebrations. And that's how we should be, being children of the one creator. So then there are those that were the xenophobe. Oh, I love those folks. I tell you, hey? And you heard one of them. They're in our country. They should leave their religion in their country and be following our traditions. I'll talk about the tradition of the RCMP here in a second, just so that we're clear about where all these iconic images came from, and all these iconic, different, the red tunic, the Stetson, and the boots, and also the breeches. What are the origins of this? We say that they're Canadian symbols, but do we actually know what the origins are? I will share that with you in a second. And some of you might be surprised. These are some of the pins. Like, folks, take a moment and, just take a moment and think about how someone actually had to, remember back then we didn't have these computers that you actually could go on to and design these things. You had to do it by hand. So someone actually spent time making these things and then would take it to a pin shop and have them, stamped out, right? So this is effort, this is work to advance some really hateful language. And I want you to know some of this still exists today. I was able to find some of these pins recently. My son-in-law, who lives in Calgary, shared with me, "Dad, I was at he's a military surplus enthusiast, and he went to one of these stores. He said, 'Dad, I found these pins.' And I happened to go there last year, and I went and spent some money in that store and bought about $50 worth of these pins. I still have them. And I often share them to folks. And those are some of the pins. And I thought I had bought them all. My son-in-law went back there another time and said, "Dad, he's got more, and they're shinier." So I think that tells me that these are still being made today. Regina was quite a time. A lot of my friends, some of my friends would say, "Well, I'd go back to Regina and do my basic training over again." And I've often said, "No, once was enough. Thank you very much. I don't need to go back and do that all over again." It was tough. It was very, very tough. And it's supposed to be. But it was particularly tough on our troop. I don't know why. I didn't certainly remember it in that way, but some of my troop mates have said, "No, Baltej, we were treated a little differently." And they said it was because of you. I said, "Okay, well, that doesn't surprise me." But we went through significant challenges. I remember and I won't be able to share with you all of the things that I've got here on the slide, but let me talk about a couple of things. We lost 6 of our cadets within our classroom, within our troop, because training was so tough. And we lost 6 of them, to the point where we actually got to a place where we made, an edict amongst ourselves. We made a rule, and partially came after also speaking with my mother one particular evening. It had just been a tough day. They'd made us run, they'd made us swim, they'd made us do all kinds of things. And then by the time we got back to our dorm, someone had left one of their storage chests open. And when that happens and a corporal walks through, everybody's stuff gets thrown out the window. So all of our stuff had been thrown out of the window, our clothes, our beds, our socks, our shirts, everything was up. We thought as we were marching up to the dorm that it was some other troops. We realized it was ours. So we spent the rest of the evening just collecting, figuring out whose stuff was out there hanging on trees. And then finally got to talk to my mother that night at 10 o'clock, 10:30 on a phone that's connected to the wall. And, after I spoke to my wife and I spoke to my mom, I just got a bit emotional, got a little homesick. And I got to tell you, my mom says, no, you don't get to do that. You don't get to do that. This is not about you anymore. This is about an entire community. So get it done. And that was shortly after that we all kind of made a decision that, okay, there's no more quitting around here. It's a badge or a body bag. We're not leaving here unless we get a badge or they take us out in a body bag. It had come to that type of a thinking that to get through the toughest times in training. My trainer came to me one day and said, "Hey, Baltej, how are you doing? How are things going? How is training going?" And I said, "Well, you know what? It's great. I'm actually getting postcards from my fans all over Canada." He said, "No, that's wonderful. That's really great that you're getting all this support." I said, "Well, I wouldn't call it support exactly." He said, "Oh, okay, well, let me have a look at those postcards." So I gave him my postcards. Well, they were postcards from all over Canada, and they read and I'll paraphrase. In some instance, it was, "Don't come to such and such a town because we have a bullet with your name carved on it. Don't come to such and such a town because we have a plot in the cemetery figured out for you. Don't come to such and such a town, and and if you're going to come to such and such a town, leave your family behind because you're not going to be here very long," and so on and on and on and on. So I would get those kinds of postcards from all over Canada. I just kept putting them in a shoebox and just ignoring them until my corporal saw it. And from that point on, they started to treat each one of those letters as a threat to a police officer's life. When I graduated, I came to Vancouver, and it wasn't very long after coming to Vancouver, and I had some leave that I had acquired, and my sister was getting married, that I had the protective section come up to me while we were preparing for my sister's wedding, telling me they needed to sequester me and put me into protective custody because they had received a credible threat where somebody was calling and saying that they were going to shoot me. So I at that point said that, look, I'm not abandoning my sister in the middle of her marriage, so I got to do what I got to do, and we'll see what happens. Anyways, they did find the man who did, have firearms and so on and so forth, and that was dealt with, and off we went. So there was a couple of other events that happened during my time in Regina, but needless to say, I graduated. The community, the Sikh community in Regina, were incredibly ecstatic, were grateful. They actually had a Baltej Singh Dhillon night in Regina just as I was retiring. It was wonderful. It was a gala celebration. But all that to say, it wasn't about me. And I think that's important to understand here. It was the fact that the community was finally feeling that they were accepted, that they were a part of this country. And that's why the celebration. Otherwise, there are hundreds of Mounties graduating daily. What was so special about me? Nothing, other than the fact that I represented a particular community who was finally being represented in a national institution. And then I got told I was going to Quesnel. I had no idea where Quesnel was. I'd been to Williams Lake, I'd been to Prince George, and Quesnel was in the middle, but I had no memory of Quesnel. That was a bit of a trepidation. That was a bit scary and nervous. When I got to Quesnel, my first day in Quesnel after I finished a graveyard shift, my staff sergeant invited me to his office. When I got to his office, he made me required me to stand at attention, just as I'm standing there. And during that time, he told me that he didn't agree with me. He didn't care for me. He didn't care for the changes in the RCMP, and that this was something that was a mistake that was made. But as long as I did what I was told to do and did my job, he said that I wouldn't get any trouble from him. You know what that is? That's tolerance. We use that word a lot, don't we? When we say, well, let's be tolerant again with each other. Well, that's what tolerance is. That's what tolerance is. I think we can be more than tolerance. 2 years later, to the day, Staff Sergeant Bob Bauk was about to retire, and he went for his last shoot, and I happened to go with him. On the way back, and as we got to the detachment, and we parked in the detachment parking lot, and I remember it clearly. He looks over and said, Baltej, you know you're like a son to me, right? I said, Bob, do you remember what you said to me 2 years ago when I first arrived? And he said, no, what did I say? I said, that's because you didn't even look at me that day, Bob. And I told him what he shared. And he had a tear in his eye. He said, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry I said those things to you. That's when we moved from tolerance to actually acceptance. And it's within us. We can do it. Absolutely. 100%. Once we get past some of the other things that really don't matter at the end of the day. While I was in Quesnel, I had, and I'm going to finish up here early because there's about 3 minutes left before 11:50, and I'll just open it up for some questions. And if there's any questions, otherwise I can share some other stories as well. While I was in Quesnel, I got told by another police officer who had just arrived there, said, hey, Baltej, did you know that Rod actually said to me that good thing you don't wear a turban, because if you did, I wouldn't back you up? I said, oh my God, I never knew that. He said, yeah. And I worked with Rod on graveyard shifts from 10:45 at night to 7 o'clock in the morning. We were the only ones patrolling. We were the only ones on duty. So he was my backup. So it made me really, really nervous when I heard that he had said that or made that comment that he wouldn't back me up. I brought that to the attention of the staff sergeant, who was livid. He was absolutely. I mean, that's the one thing in the RCMP or any police force, any department in law enforcement, that you have to have that understanding. And the whole training that we go through is about being able to provide support and backup to your partner. And not having that means that you may not come home that evening. So this was critical. This was critical. Knowing or feeling and understanding that there may be a time where I may not be able to count on my partner. He was dealt with. He apologized to me. He said, no, I said that, but that's not what I mean. I apologize. I accepted his apology, and we went on. But it was disturbing that type of thinking, that type of thought was present. The mayor initially said he didn't want me there and had made the comment. And then the Indo-Canadian community got a hold of him, which was the reason why he got elected. And I think within a week, he changed his tune and said, I think Baltej would be a great addition to the RCMP here in Quesnel. It'd be a feather in our cap. So, shifted his opinion. There was a sign out when we came to Quesnel, when we first arrived in Quesnel. There was a huge sign, nailed onto a tree as you drove into Quesnel, and it said, "Welcome to Quesnel, Turbo Cop." Yeah, I didn't know what to make of that either. I was like, okay, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure. And but when you get handed lemons, you make lemonade. So I adopted it. I figured everybody who had gone through or come out of Quesnel, who had been going through Quesnel, would have seen the sign, and they have now adopted the moniker Turbo Cop. So I took it on. I accepted the moniker, and I would go into schools and I'd say, hey, Turbo Cop in the house. And so people would, the kids loved that. I made great strides and got to, work with the youth there. And I would say that because of that moniker, and in a couple of years, I applied to be the community liaison officer in Quesnel. And it was unheard of that somebody with only 2 years of service would be given that responsibility. But because of the inroads that I had made with the youth and the work that I had done, the staff sergeant, charged me with that responsibility. I was given that lateral responsibility of being a community liaison officer for the town of Quesnel, for the city of Quesnel. There's a number of other stories that I could share with you, but let me share one last one. While I was in Quesnel, different things would happen. I would go into bars and people and do my bar checks and so on. And people would actually stop drinking, take time out of their drinking to stand up and boo me while I was in the bar. And they would continue booing me while I was there until I would leave. I would take a bow, thank them for their time. And that's what got me through most of that, was humor. There was also a time that there was this rumor that was circling around town that there was a $5,000 bounty on my turban, that anybody could knock my turban off, bring it to one of the bars, they'd be rewarded with $5,000. There was even a story done by the Prince George Tribune at the time on that particular rumor, because I don't think anybody really actually had the $5,000, but that didn't matter. People were still motivated, and there were some folks that actually confronted me with it, and that I had to deal with that issue. No, there was never a time that I couldn't continue. But there was a time where I certainly confronted, which most police officers have to, the dark side of policing, the evil. I worked on the Picton investigation. I worked on the Air India task force. Post-traumatic stress disorder is real. And I'll share with you a very quick example. When I went into the Air India task force, I was asked to catalog all of the victims. And I was sitting there going through file after file, cataloging the different victims and really reviewing the files. My staff sergeant walked up to me and said, "Stop." And I did not know, I had not realized that I had been crying. Because when I opened each file, I saw my family. I saw my children. I saw my wife. I saw my parents. I saw my relatives. Every time I opened a file, I saw them. But I was also bound by the duty that I was given. So I had forgotten that I was crying. And I kept going. And it was only when my staff sergeant came along and said, no, stop, put that away. Put that away, was when I realized that I was starting to break inside. So those times were certainly there. And when I worked on the Picton investigation, I had opportunity to work with the only eyewitness that observed, witnessed Picton commit the crime. And listening to her for 6 hours on every horrid detail still lives with me. And those are things that I have to live with. Never thought that I could not continue, but there were dark days, there were times where I needed my family, my support, my friends, my faith, my practice to get me to the next day. And if it wasn't for my faith, my daily meditation, my daily practice, I would be broken today. I probably would be, using alcohol or out there doing other things. I don't know, to numb the pain. But thank you for the question. It's something that many of us struggle with. Emma, may I just take a moment, Emma?
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. Look, a story is not a story unless there's somebody there to listen to it. So I appreciate all of you for taking the time out of your day to hear my words and my sharing. I look at you as my fellow Canadians, my neighbors, my brothers and sisters in my community. And I think it's through this conversation, through these discussions, and I appreciate BCHF for what you're doing, is how we learn about each other. And we move away from some of the rumor mongering and some of the challenges that we've come across, come to understand. And we move away from tolerance to understanding and acceptance. And so that is our journey. That's who we are. That's how I see myself as a Canadian, and that's how I see all of you. So I thank you for your time. I thank you for this opportunity. I thank you for this privilege and the space where I was able to speak about my story. Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.